So right now, while you're watching this, money is moving. Big money, global money, and it's moving north.
Yeah, Canada has become something it has never really been before. We're not America's polite neighbor. We're not that middle power that nobody takes seriously. Nope. Canada is now officially the most financially stable, most creditworthy nation in the entire Western world. And the world's money managers are starting to act on that.
Now, this is not a feel-good Canada story. This is about a massive shift that's happening in global money. And to understand why Canada is suddenly in this position, you need to understand the trap that the US has walked itself into. Because the United States is not just running a deficit. They are running a slow-motion financial collapse. And it is already touching your mortgage, your grocery bill, and your retirement savings, whether you live in Canada or the United States.
The United States is more than $39 trillion in debt. Now, 39 trillion is a number so enormous that most of us can't even picture it. I know I can't. So let's make it real for you.
Yeah, think about your own mortgage or your parents' mortgage or the mortgage that you finally paid off. You know how in the early years, most of your monthly payment is just interest? You're not actually paying down the principal itself? Well, basically what you're doing is you're just paying the bank for the privilege of having borrowed that money in the first place.
And that's exactly what's happening to the United States right now. But it's on a scale that is almost incomprehensible. America is now paying roughly $1 trillion a year just in interest on its debt. That's not going to build schools, that's not fixing roads, that's not funding hospitals or veterans or anything that could help the American people. That is purely, entirely the cost of money that was already borrowed and spent years ago.
$1 trillion every single year just to service the debt, just to stay at the table. Wow.
I'm telling you, Dave, it's the most expensive subscription service in human history. And the worst part? They don't even get free shipping. They just get the privilege of staying afloat for another 12 months while politicians go back to the television and they promise even more spending. They're promising more tax cuts, more everything, as if mathematics is some kind of conspiracy theory against them and they don't even know there's a debt there.
Yeah, and really the pace of this is what makes it even more serious. Because the US debt crossed 37 trillion, then 38 trillion, and now $39 trillion. And the jumps, they're getting faster, not slower. It's like a credit card balance that keeps growing even though you keep making the payments, because the interest is compounding faster than anything that's being paid down.
Well, what's the rule on credit card debt? Never just pay the minimum. But that's what the US is doing. Now listen, a country can carry a lot of debt for a long time if growth is strong, if politics are stable, and if borrowing stays cheap. But when debt rises this fast, the interest bill rises with it. And suddenly you are spending more than just to keep the machine running before you have built a single new thing.
And then there's the war spending. This one just blows my mind. While that interest bill is still exploding, Hegseth is now seeking more than $200 billion in additional military funding. $200 billion! And, that's just layered right on top of a debt pile that's already crushing, which tells you everything that you need to know about how Washington actually operates. When things get tense, what do? Well, their answer is always the same. Borrow more, spend more, and ask questions never.
At this rate, it's going to be 40 trillion before we even post this video. But what does the most damage is what the rest of the world watches with their mouths wide open. It's something called the debt ceiling.
Now, the debt ceiling is a legal limit on how much the US government is allowed to borrow. And here's the part that actually sounds like a joke, but it isn't. It's absolutely real. Congress, they vote on spending, they vote on tax cuts, they vote on military budgets. Every single line item. They approve it all. And then, separately, what do? They have to vote again to actually authorize paying for what they've already approved.
It's like ordering dinner, drinking the wine, eating the steak, asking for the dessert, and then standing up in the restaurant and announcing that paying the bill is tyranny. It's too expensive and I can't afford this. Well, that is exactly what the American debt ceiling is.
And the faction in the House, the same people who voted yes on every single one of these spending lines, they staged a national hostage crisis over whether America should actually honor what it already owed. That happened multiple times already this year.
That brinkmanship is not harmless because every time Washington plays this game, global investors watch, rating agencies watch, and the world's bond markets react.
So when governments borrow money, they do it by selling what are called bonds. Think of a bond as an IOU. A government says, lend me money today and I'll pay you back with interest over time. When investors trust the government, they accept lower interest because the risk is low. But when they stop trusting a government, they demand higher interest because the risk is actually growing.
So when Washington keeps threatening to default on its obligations, even if it's just a political stunt by Trump, bond investors start demanding higher interest to compensate for that risk. And when U.S. interest rates go up everywhere around the world, including Canada, including your mortgage renewal.
So let me be direct about why this is our problem, even if you've never owned a single American stock or cared about Washington politics for a single day in your life.
U.S. government bonds are called treasuries, and they are the foundation of the global financial system. Every bank, every pension fund, every insurance company in the world holds them. And they are supposed to be the safest investment on Earth. They're the bedrock.
Think of it like the foundation of a house. You might not think about the foundation when everything is fine, but when it starts to crack, everything built on top starts to shift. Doors stop closing properly, floors start sloping, and suddenly problems show up in rooms that seem completely unrelated.
Well, this is what is happening in the U.S. right now. American fiscal instability is seeping into global interest rates. And global interest rates affect everything. They affect your mortgage renewal, your line of credit, your car loan, a small business loan, the provincial budget that funds your hospitals. None of this is separate from Washington's debt problem, and that's a real problem for the rest of the world.
It is, and for those old enough to remember 2008, remember when the American housing bubble collapsed and suddenly retirement savings across Canada and the world got hammered overnight? You already know how fast American financial problems become everybody's problems.
So postponing is not solving. Once interest becomes one of the fastest growing line items in the budget, a country starts losing options. Every new crisis becomes harder to answer, and every investment becomes a fight. Every new conflict gets layered on top of already rotting fiscal foundations. So that's the real danger here, a slow narrowing of choices.
Now, here's where Canada actually enters the picture, and I want to be clear here. This is not a Canada good, America bad kind of story. This is a structural reality. Canada has the lowest net to GDP ratio in the G7. Now, debt to GDP is a simple way of measuring how large your debt is compared to the size of your economy. It's like asking, compared to what you earn, how much do you owe? The lower that ratio, the more financial room you have to move.
And right now, Canada's ratio is the best in the group of 7 richest countries on Earth. Better than the US, obviously. Better than the UK, better than France, Germany, Japan, or Italy.
And think about it this way. America is trying to run a marathon while dragging a grand piano up the hill. Canada, we're just carrying a backpack. Both are weight, but one still lets you move and the other turns every single step into a crisis.
And here's what your mainstream media is not telling you. Canada isn't just surviving, we are thriving and we're starting to move. While Washington argues over whose fault it is, Democrats or Republicans, Ottawa still has the fiscal room and the financial space to invest. We're investing in defense, in infrastructure, in trade partnerships that don't run through Washington, in the kind of strategic building that changes what a country can actually do 10 years from now.
And Canada's parliamentary system, the way our government is actually structured, well, it matters here too. Because in Canada, a government that cannot pass its budget falls. That consequence alone keeps the process moving. You don't get the same recurring hostage drama over and over again, whether Canada will honor its obligations. And this, global investors notice, and in the world of sovereign debt and countries borrowing money, borrowing is an absolute superpower.
But listen, Canada, don't get smug because we have debt too. We have deficits and we have provinces with fiscal pressures. We have housing costs that are completely unhinged. And if our growth stalls or if our productivity stays weak, or if the government keeps spending without building the economic base underneath it, well, we could be in big trouble too.
So this is Canada's window right here. Not to sit back and watch, but to actually use the room that we have to build domestic resilience, to diversify trade, to link our own economy together with infrastructure that reduces our dependence on American political weather.
Because the real dividing line in all of this is simple. Debt is either a tool or a trap. When you borrow to build capacity like energy systems, ports, transit networks, training programs, the things that make your economy stronger 10 years from now, hey, that is a tool. That is an investment.
But when borrowing mostly keeps old promises alive, when the interest snowballs and politicians keep avoiding the math, you're financing yesterday and calling it leadership. And that is the trap part. And the United States right now looks less like a superpower managing its finances and more like a gambler telling the table that he's one hand away from turning it all around.
So what does this actually mean for you?
Well, if you're renewing a mortgage in the next 2 to 3 years, the length of time American interest rates stay elevated is directly connected to how quickly Washington gets serious about its debt. If they don't, then the rates are going to stay higher for longer, and that cost lands on you and your mortgage.
So if you are retired or close to retirement, the pension funds and saving accounts your retirement depends on are heavily invested in a global financial system where the U.S. Treasuries are the foundation. So if that foundation keeps cracking, those funds have to work harder to protect what you have already built.
And if you're a Canadian who wants this country to matter, to actually punch at its weight on the world stage, this right now is the moment. Not because America is falling apart, but because for the first time in a very long time, Canada has both the fiscal room and the global credibility to step forward. The question is whether our leaders have the nerve to use it.
Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney is already proving that he has the nerve. Will he keep the government behind him? And will the Canadian people trust him to use his banker brain to keep us afloat?
Well, if the United States does not make real structural changes to its interest spiral, not a debt ceiling circus, but actual reform, well, then we're going to watch American political power slowly shrink over the next decade. And in that world, the countries with real fiscal room, like Canada here, become the ones setting the global agenda.
So we want to hear from you. Do you think that Washington is even capable of fixing its debt at this point? Or is the political system too broken to find its way back?
And for Canada, what should Ottawa be investing in right now while we still have the room to move? We want to know what you think, so definitely let us know your ideas.
And do you think in the next decade, Canada is going to be the global leader that we were always meant to be?
I think so.
So if this helped you make sense of what is actually going on, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who has been watching the news and wondering what all this actually means for their wallet.
And if you want to support this channel, remember to check out the A-Team and the merch store. The links are in the pinned comment below.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.